I'm Tamara Sonn, Emerita Professor in the History of Islam here at Georgetown. And it's a pleasure to welcome you today to our event, which is the launch of our Festschrift titled Overcoming Orientalism, Essays in Honor of John L. Esposito, published by Oxford University Press in 2021. Today, each of our authors will describe their contributions to the Festschrift and say a few words about how Dr. Esposito has influenced their work. We'll go alphabetically, starting with Asma Afsaruddin, professor in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures and affiliated with the Departments of Religious Studies and Gender Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. Asma?
I do want to begin by saying it has been such an honor to be asked to contribute to this important Festschrift, and also such an honor to be taking part in this event to celebrate the accomplishments of our dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Professor John L. Esposito. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So I have been aware of John and his incredible writings since I was a grad student, which was many moons ago at this point. And indeed, how could one not have been aware of John and his influence in the field? He was and remains a towering figure in academia, and he continues to dominate the field of Islamic studies in a way that no one else can. And because John is more than just a scholar and academic, he is an engaged scholar and academic, so that he has also felt morally called upon to take part in important public conversations, for example, about what should be considered fair and even-handed US foreign policy measures vis-a-vis the Middle East and the Muslim majority world in general. He was and remains a leader both inside and outside the academy. And he set the bar very high for those of us who aspired to be like him. He reminded us that it was not enough to write scholarly books, to teach our classes, and climb up the academic ladder of success. We also had to evolve as human beings, to care about our larger moral commitments to the outside world, and put our academic expertise at the service of our fellow human beings. That has made John a tireless warrior for social and political justice. He exemplifies what it means to speak truth to power, even if that invited the wrath of those who would prefer that he remain silent and be complicit with injustice and wrongdoing. When many of us were dragged out kicking and screaming out of our comfortable ivory tower to talk to the media, and we were invited to write opinion pieces for various media outlets in the aftermath of September 11, John became my role model more than ever. He was the unflappable, consummate public intellectual who brought academic heft to his public conversations and modeled personal integrity when he refused to be cowed by those who tried to bully him into silence. There are hardly any intellectual and moral giants like John Esposito anymore in our field. I was racking my brains the other day and trying to think of someone who could measure up to the full gamut of his accomplishments and his attributes. And honestly, I couldn't think of anyone. I count myself as being very fortunate to have met John years ago and benefited, not just from his scholarship, which goes without saying, but also from his wisdom, his humor, his compassion, and his basic humaneness. I've learned from him to help junior faculty, to take principled positions on contentious issues, and to never lose sight of your moral compass and your larger obligation to the global village we cohabit. Thank you, John, for everything you've done over the years. mere words are not sufficient to express my gratitude to you, but I'm glad I've had this opportunity today to at least try. God bless.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody, especially John. You know, it's fitting that the book that we contributed to is about, on some level, combating stereotypes, because when I thought about preparing my remarks today, I thought that in a really meaningful way, there's a false stereotype about great scholars that John's example utterly demolishes. And that stereotype is that great scholars somewhere along the line, because they're so invested in their own thoughts and in the accolades they get for their many influential writings, they divorce their mind from their heart. That is certainly not the case with you, John. And I mean that on so many levels, and Asma referred so beautifully to many of them. But the one I'm thinking of particularly is your role as a mentor. I first met you in your writings. I remember being an undergraduate at Harvard just a year before my graduation, when your book on women in Muslim family law came out. And then I started reading all your books voraciously until I had the first opportunity to meet you. You came to Bloomington, Indiana, where I was in my first job, and I got the pleasure of introducing you. And sort of from that moment on, we made a personal connection, which, you know, ended up influencing my life in such profound ways that it is difficult for me to express in words. I was at a really low point in my life at one point because I took a principled stand, and I got in a lot of trouble. And when you get in a lot of trouble, a lot of people that you think are your friends seem to disappear, and there's a lot of silence. But I got a phone call from John Esposito, and the phone call was offering me not only the kind of emotional and spiritual support of a father, but also the incredibly valuable and important support of someone in the field who was respected, to say the least, and was willing to put himself on the line and marshal others to come to my defense. John, I will never forget that. And I am so deeply grateful for that. But the story of your supporting me doesn't end there. On every occasion that I reached out to you for some support, you never did it perfunctorily. You just did it with such incredible robustness and, dare I say, love. And, you know, it's everything from supporting me as I was trying to build this program in Catholic Muslim Studies at Catholic Theological Union, and inviting me to join boards like that of the Walid Center, and appointing the first person, I think, whose degree was not in Christian theology, but in Islamic studies, to be the chair of the Theological Education Committee at the American Academy of Religion. And that opportunity was one to grow as a practical theologian with expertise in Islamic studies, you know, in my own environment, teaching in graduate theological education. I wouldn't have gotten tenure where I am without your support and your letter. I owe so much to you, John. I know many people do. But I thank God every day for the way in which you integrate your head and your heart, especially as a mentor. from the bottom of my heart, thank you, John.
Thank you very much, everyone, for having me today. So many good words have been shared, and I find it really very gratifying to know a bit more about Professor John Esposito. What I want to share to everyone is actually on how Professor John is actually viewed here in Southeast Asia. And it is clear, and I think Imtiyaz will add to what I'm going to say, that John is actually the Mick Jagger of Islamic studies here in Southeast Asia. He's like a rock star. And when I was a postgraduate student at the National University of Singapore, we had a discussion over getting him here for our inter-religious dialogue. And the debate amongst us was, would he actually come? That was the first thing. The second thing was, should we fly him first class? And in
You
the
asked
end,
the right questions.
that's the right question. And in the end, I mean, we were pretty shocked when we actually brought him here, put him up in a very nice hotel, that what we saw was really a very humble human being. And that basically changed my mind a lot about academics in general. And this has been the case through many of my engagements with John. We have a joke here in Southeast Asia, and I think John must have heard it when he was in Perak. He was invited for one of the conferences in Perak, that John Esposito is more Muslim than most Muslim academics, more Islamic than most Islamic intellectuals. He's courageous, he's engaged, he's inventive in many of his works. He's very frank. Sometimes people say he's brutally frank, to a point that even Muslims find it very difficult to sometimes accept some of the very honest insights that he gives us about our own civilization. But I said just now, he at the same time demonstrate a kind of intellectual humility that we do not see in many academics today. And I would like to underline that, especially in Islamic studies, here in Southeast Asia, and I had the fine experience of being in the US and did my PhD in the UK, intellectual humility is something that is pretty lacking. And John actually showed to us who are very young about how to be humble, but at the same time, be accomplished in our profession. I am personally very moved by his concerns on the topic of revival and reform in Islam. And more than just a subject of study for John, he made this whole idea of reform in Islam as part and parcel of his own life journey and his engagement. He has been very supportive of young scholars engaged in the work of reform. Scott was mentioning just now that John helped him in his Words of Times, and that was the case for me as well. I got into some trouble as well for the stand that I make in public, trying very hard to be like John Esposito, and then got myself into really a lot of trouble here in Singapore. It was fun though, and in the end, I mean, John didn't know anything about me. But when my name was proposed to be part of Georgetown University, he welcomed me with open arms. And when I first met him at his office in ACMCU, I was expecting someone who would be like, listen to me, boy, you don't know what you're doing, and here's what you should do. He was just like this man who had known me for years and years, cracking jokes about him being in the first day of his undergrad studies, and professors asking him whether he's selling drugs or actually he's coming in to get a degree. The Italian jokes that he always tell us about, and his graciousness towards young scholars such as myself is a trait that all of us actually cherish about John Esposito, and we regard him, I personally regard him as my mentor and a source of inspiration in the things that I do. And more importantly, to me, one of his defining contribution to the field of Islamic studies is actually his work, Islam, the Straight Path. I was in a local bookshop the other day, and interestingly, the book has been republished, and I don't know whether John is actually informed of this, by a publisher in Saudi Arabia. Of all the countries in the world, they have republished the book, and it's now circulating in Singapore. And of course, I mean, John is very much informed that the book has been translated into many languages. If you go to Indonesia, you have an Indonesian translation of the book, Islam Jalan Yang Lurus, and of course in Malaysia and others. So I wish to take this opportunity to thank John for all the support that he has given us, especially myself. And we hope and pray that he will continue to write books that will be of benefit, not only for scholars of Islamic studies, but for the Muslim world in general. That's all. Thank you.
I want to start with a story about the Buddha, who had achieved enlightenment after a great struggle. And there he was in peace, nirvana, and happiness. And the inconvenient thought occurred to him that perhaps he should help other people to achieve this peace too. And he thought, no, I don't want to do that. It's going to be very depressing and uphill work. I'd rather not. At which point the god Brahma called out from the highest heaven and said, then the world will be lost. The world will be utterly lost. And he descended from his highest heaven, and the god kneels before the enlightened man and said, Lord, please preach your Dharma. Look at the world, drowning in pain and suffering and anger. And the Buddha spent the next 40 years of his life tramping the streets and villages of India, trying to help other people to deal with their suffering. And so often, academia means that people retreat from the world into the library, into sort of deeply scholastic studies. But that's not what John has ever done. John has always gone back to the marketplace in an exemplary manner. We met on a rather inauspicious day to me. It was about 1996. And I'd just been kicked off the Diane Rehm show because she hadn't liked my book about Jerusalem. And I was wondering why on earth I was going to see this scholar in Georgetown, because I have had quite some difficulties sometimes with scholars, because I am not one. I'm a failed academic. I failed my PhD with terrible publicity at Oxford, and it wasn't in Islamic studies, it was in English literature. Then I went into school teaching, and I lost that job because of ill health. And finally ended up, strangely, talking about Islam and on television, but knowing really very little. John and I have a similar background because we were both religious. John was a Franciscan and I'd been a Roman Catholic nun. Both of us had left our religious orders. So that was going to be a tie between us, because that's a strange thing to have in common. But I've not surprisingly, academics often look down their nose at me because I have no credentials. I haven't got a PhD. I've never studied in a university. At least studying Islamic studies. And I was wondering, and when I was at Harvard after 9/11, they really were not comfortable having me there at all, talking on the radio, etc. But So I was a bit worried about what this eminent scholar would make of me. And we had lunch in the university, and we got on immediately because, of course, we had that shared background. And John has always been a friend, and we work together. And he has never once looked down at my lack of credentials. Indeed, I think he's introduced me to Georgetown, which is whereas I get a rather sort of grim response sometimes at universities. Georgetown, I'm sure thanks to John, opened its arms to me. He gave me an honorary degree, and I've always felt extremely at home there. And that's the cut that John does not fit the usual box of academia. I've had wonderful visits to Georgetown. I've had wonderful visits to John and Jean in their Georgetown house. We've been friends. It's been a great source of richness to me. Not being in a university is quite a lonely life. I'm writing books, and I'm studying and trying to educate myself, but and you don't have many, and I have no colleagues, but I do have a colleague and a dear friend with John, and I think I caught a glimpse of their dear little dog just now, and we both share the same passion for the canine. So it's so important somehow that we get to speak out and speak to the issues of our time in our world that is growing more and more troubled and desperate day by day. John has been an absolute exemplar about making us do that. We will never stop. We have always to try to find ways of bringing the sacred, the things that we study and that we love, and to bring it to people who don't have that opportunity to study and think, who are often looking and lost and puzzled about, as well they might be, about what on earth is going on in the world. And so John has done an amazing, it's been an amazing life, and a great source of joy and an honor to have been his friend. And I can't wait to see the book. I can't wait to see John and Jean and BJ again after all this lockdown, if it ever ends. And it's wonderful to be with you all today to celebrate this extraordinary career. Thank you, John, for everything.
Hello, everyone. I am a former student of Dr. Esposito's. I think after my 9 a.m. Arabic class, Dr. Esposito's pro seminar, my freshman year at Georgetown, was the first class that I took. And it was a class called Islam in the West. And in so many ways, it launched me on this trajectory that I've been on in my own education and career for the last now 12 years, which is kind of crazy to think about. And throughout, this last decade plus, Dr. Esposito has always been there. Obviously, the course was extremely formative in my own education. I ended up doing my my minor or my certificate through the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. So getting a certificate from the center. And throughout my years at Georgetown, occasionally I would reach out to Dr. Esposito, even when I wasn't taking his courses. And I wanted to write for a public audience. And Dr. Esposito always was giving me advice, editors to reach out to, people that I could connect with to help craft, hone my writing and submit pieces. And because of his encouragement and his support, I was able to start publishing in outlets even before I graduated from college. And that kind of support and empowerment at a young age really meant a lot. After I graduated from Georgetown, from undergrad, I did a Fulbright in Jordan, which is actually where the chapter that I submitted to the book comes from. I talk about my experiences on the Fulbright in the book chapter. But then my first job after I came back to the United States was at the Bridge Initiative. And, you know, people say sometimes that you're never going to get your dream job right out of college, or for your first job, you're never going to get your dream job. But at the Bridge Initiative, I was able to do exactly what I felt called to do. I was able to tackle this problem of Islamophobia that is something that Dr. Esposito really helped me as a young person to realize was a problem. I was able to write for an audience and to do really meaningful substantive work right out of college. And, you know, the last thing that I'll say, and I could echo so much of what everyone else has said too, but Dr. Esposito was the first person who really showed me how you could be an advocate against Islamophobia and an advocate for Muslims without actually being Muslim yourself. And that's something that I've tried to take on in my own work since. And I am just so grateful for the support and the mentorship that you've given me, Dr. Esposito, over the last many years. So thank you. It's really great to be here with all of you.
Thank you so much, John, for allowing me to participate in this great event and making a contribution to your Festschrift. You know, I was not a student of Dr. Esposito, at least not directly, but I can go back to my days as an undergraduate student. So this is, you know, ancient history now, I think in the 80s. I mean, objectively, it's ancient history. In my memory, it seems like it was just yesterday. But those were bleak days. I think younger students who are going into the field today don't really understand what it was like to study Islam in the Middle East in the 1980s. It was a really bleak experience where it was completely par for the course for otherwise well-regarded experts to engage in the most sort of silly-minded stereotypes of Arabs, Islam, the Middle East, sometimes using overtly racist stereotypes in a way which, you know, would be truly shocking if it were to happen today. And at that time, Professor Esposito was kind of a lone voice in the intellectual world saying, no, Muslims are human beings. Muslims have a rich tradition. Muslims are working hard to contribute positively to the modern world through their own tradition, right? And his scholarship reflected that. But I want to stress it wasn't just his scholarship. There are a lot of people who do excellent scholarship, but it's a very few professors that have a public impact on the lives of students and the citizenry, right? And that is truly remarkable, right? So, you know, I was thinking about what Karen was mentioning, that she goes to universities and they look down on her because she doesn't have a PhD, et cetera. You know, well, I think a lot of it could be sublimated envy, because most of us, you know, who are in theory really excellent scholars, you know, we're excited if 100 people read our works. Okay, so it's great to be able to have a public impact, right? It's even greater to be able to do that as a scholar, because so few of us as scholars can combine both scholarly expertise, scholarly rigor, and an ability to communicate to the public, right? Which at the end of the day is really a crucial function of our universities. Our universities need to play a public role in educating our citizenry if we want to preserve a democracy, right? And for me, Professor Esposito has always played that role in a very courageous way, right? Again, we underestimate the amount of courage it would take for an Italian Catholic in the 80s to stand up for Muslims and Arabs, right? Today it's easier when you have people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and these other people on the floor of Congress, even speaking directly to Joe Biden. But that was not what it was like 30 years ago, I assure you, right? So I am personally, even though I am not your student, Professor Esposito, I am deeply in debt to what you have done and your work. And it's been a great privilege to be able to contribute to this volume. And then finally, I would just like to also say as a mere footnote, when I did finally become an academic in 2006 after a long circuitous route, you very generously invited me regularly to events in Georgetown, and that was much appreciated. And so again, thank you very much for the service to your field, for your courage, your moral integrity, and your leadership, without which many of us would not be here today. So it was a great honor for me to make a contribution to your volume. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. And I'd like to begin by strongly endorsing the comparison between John Esposito and Mick Jagger. I've been at conferences around the world with John Esposito. When he does enter the room, he does have this rock star sort of status. And of course, Mick Jagger is still singing, and so is John Esposito in various ways. So let me begin by thanking Tamara Sonn for including me in this project. It's quite an honor to be part of this book project. I want to begin by sort of echoing what some people have already said, but I want to add some new sort of notes to the discussion. So first of all, I want to thank John really for his generosity and thoughtfulness in supporting the work and the careers of younger academics coming up in the field behind you. There's too many names to mention. I don't know all of them, but I'm very mindful of the very generous support that you've given me throughout my career. It's profoundly and deeply appreciated, and it won't be soon forgotten. And so in this sense, I think your mentorship and generosity, beyond what you've written, does serve as a model for those of us who are in the field right now in terms of how we relate to younger academics coming up behind us. Secondly, I want to share an observation about the chapter that I wrote. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to contribute to this volume in honor of John Esposito, I started to reread some of your earlier work, John: Islam and Politics, Islam and Democracy, The Islamic Threat, Voices of Resurgent Islam. And the more that I reread your scholarship, I had a profound sense of déjà vu that came over me. What I was reading struck me as something that was intimately and deeply familiar and intellectually soothing. And then it suddenly sort of hit me that much of my own work, much of my own scholarship on the Middle East and on the Islamic world has simply been a derivative and an extended commentary on your own pioneering contributions to the field. Specifically, two broad themes stand out that I'm indebted to you for in terms of your intellectual contributions, and that I have benefited from immensely. Number one, your early and I think pioneering critique of modernization theory and the secular assumptions that inform it. And two, your very nuanced, thoughtful, and contextualized understanding of the rise of political Islam. In both of these areas, I've written on these subjects, and much of my own contributions to the field are really, as I said, extended commentaries and analysis of, I think, breakthrough arguments that you first introduced and that I first read a long time ago. So thank you very much for that. But I think what Tamara just said bears elaborating on. I think what really distinguishes John Esposito and where he doesn't get enough recognition is for the many risks and for absorbing the many body blows along the way during his distinguished career, for taking those risks and absorbing these body blows. And of course, I'm referring specifically to the slander, the defamation, the libelous attacks on John's career over the years by the Islamophobic industry, led primarily by Daniel Pipes and Frank Gaffney and people who run Campus Watch and the Canary Mission, those types of people. And if you think about it, there's really a small handful of people who have been subjected to this type of consistent ongoing abuse and defamation. You know, who else in academia has to sort of live in this type of you know, environment and always sort of, you know, be mindful of what he writes or says could then end up on the desk of the, you know, of the provost of the university at Georgetown in this case. And of course, it's important also to acknowledge in this context that much of these attacks, much of this defamation really stems from John Esposito's very principled, humane, and courageous defense of the human rights and national rights of the Palestinian people. You know, we've been exposed to this topic once again over the last 10 days in terms of the assault on Gaza. John has consistently stood up for the Palestinians in a political context where it's very difficult for people to speak humanely about the Palestinians. And I do want to say that, you know, despite the, you know, the horrors of the last 10 days, we're all aware that there's a changing reality in front of us in terms of the public discourse on Palestine, in terms of the changing political culture, and in terms of the, you know, for the first time at the level of Congress, we're seeing some really courageous statements being said. And I think that has to do with, you know, the contributions that many people have made over the years in terms of humanizing the suffering of the Palestinians, and that includes John Esposito. So I think he should take some credit in terms of this broad transformation that we're seeing. It's a tribute to him and his career, and I think that fact should not go unnoticed. I also want to just quickly sort of share with everyone just a brief sort of very, you know, unforgettable moment that I had in 2014 when John and I were both in Tunis, and he invited me to join him on a visit to the home of Rashid Ghannouchi. And I was really touched when we went to Sheikh Rashid's house, how he was really embraced and welcomed by Sheikh Rashid as really a friend, as a member of the family, and it was really touching to sort of see that connection. And of course, it just reminded me of another important contribution that John has made, and that has been his deep sympathy, his compassion, and his understanding for the struggles of Muslim societies around the world, struggling for human rights and democracies against despotic regimes, many of them supported by the West. I saw this firsthand when we were at Sheikh Rashid's house. It was really touching, and it just, you know, reinforces the point that people have already, you know, mentioned. John Esposito was really a friend to Muslims around the world, and I think that should not be forgotten. And finally, you know, rumor has it that, you know, John Esposito is working on a memoir. I look forward to reading it. I suspect in the office of the president of Georgetown University, there's a massive file of complaints that have been sent to the president's office for the things that John has written and said over the years. It would be fascinating reading in terms of understanding the depth and breadth of Islamophobia and the constraints on academic freedom to get access to that file. I hope John might consider including some of this in his memoir. It would be fascinating reading. It would be a contribution to the field. You know, there's a lot more that I'd like to say. I'm sorry that we can't be together in person to have this sort of moment of celebration, but I'm hoping there's going to be some time in the fall. We're at Georgetown University, at John's home institution, where we can gather in person and celebrate his very important contributions, not only to the field of Islamic studies, but also, I think, to the struggle for human rights and democracy in the Muslim world. You know, the Muslim world is going through a very dark moment, and John has been a friend and ally, illuminating some of that darkness during these very difficult times. So for all of those reasons, thank you very much, John.
Good morning, friends and colleagues, and especially good morning to Dr. Esposito. So I was trying to remember when I first heard of Dr. John Esposito, and I think I have pinpointed the exact moment. It was in the spring of 1980, when as a high school student, I was preparing to come from Georgia, my home state, Georgia, up to Massachusetts for college studies. And my uncle, my late uncle, wrote to me all the way from Pakistan. My uncle was Shafiq Hashemi, professor of political science and vice chancellor at Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad. And he wrote to me when he heard that I was coming to Massachusetts to say very, very explicitly, you must get in touch with John Esposito. I know of your interests in Islamic studies. He's right there. He's right there in Massachusetts. So of course, I didn't actually have a chance to meet Professor Esposito at that point, but I voraciously consumed the works that he was publishing that were coming out in a steady stream in the year 1980. And I read everything I could get my hands on because I found them extremely refreshing. Nader and Mohammad have touched on this, and sometimes it's hard for us to remember way back to that time period. It was the period right after the Iranian Revolution. There was a wave of interest throughout the United States and the West generally on everything having to do with Islam, but especially Islamic politics, or the politics of Muslims, I should say. So what I found so refreshing about John's work was that it was really in that first wave of what I would call post-Orientalist studies of Muslim politics that took the politics of Muslims for its own sake, that appreciated that Muslims could express themselves politically in myriad ways, and that they were not tied to some abstraction known as Islamic politics. So his work informed my entire undergraduate studies. And then, of course, it continued to inform my work when I entered graduate school. So this is when I first met Professor Esposito. I'll never forget it. Again, it was a very memorable occasion because Tamara alluded to one very, very salient aspect of Professor Esposito's persona and work in general. And that is not only that it's informed by tremendous erudition, but also that it is always punctuated by very sharp wit and good humor. So I'll never forget when John came to speak at a seminar on the outbreak of the Persian Gulf War. And I believe someone in the audience asked him why Muslims are so obsessed with jihad. So, so John deflected the question very, very well by just pointing out that he was on the faculty of a college whose mascot was the Crusaders. So I think that put everything in perspective. So there's so much more I could say about how much his work has meant to me over the years, but I don't want to stay on a broad abstract level of his tremendous unmatched contributions to everything in Islamic studies. I want to talk about something very personal, very mundane, how he helped me enormously without even realizing it, because he was no longer there. In 1997, my wife took a residency at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, which some of you know is in Worcester, Massachusetts. So at that point, we were living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I was teaching already at Mount Holyoke, which is located in South Hadley, Massachusetts. So those of you who are unfamiliar with the geography of Massachusetts, Worcester is smack dab in the middle of Boston and South Hadley. So as we were planning our move to the Worcester area, I was lamenting the fact that I was going to be detached from my familiar libraries. I was not going to be able to take advantage of all the libraries in Cambridge, and I would not have all the libraries in the 5-college consortium out here in Western Massachusetts. But as it turned out, I didn't need to worry, because one of my first trips after moving to the Worcester area was to the College of the Holy Cross. And to my delight, I found that John had built up the Islamic Studies collection at the College of the Holy Cross to such a level that I didn't have anything to worry about. This was, of course, these were the days when we were all completely reliant upon printed books, upon libraries. So when I found that collection at the College of the Holy Cross Library, I knew I had a new home. John, thank you very much for all you have done for us. And thank you very much for all you did for the College of the Holy Cross Library Collection and Islamic Studies in particular. God bless, and I wish you a very, very long and happy retirement. And I'm looking forward to reading your next 200 books.
I am not retiring, but otherwise, there's a good possibility. Jean and I have worked it out that I think perhaps when I turn 90, I think I may cut back, but no, I'm not retiring.
It's wonderful to be with all of you and John to be able to share in this celebration of and with you. Given the popularity of kind of stating the bottom line up front these days, I think the most concise way to do that is just to say that back in the day, I wanted to be John Esposito when I grew up. And I remember very clearly the kind of what I would call the Esposito epiphany. And it was, you know, I was born and raised in the Middle East in a very conservative Muslim country and grew up understanding and thinking of Islam as just the ambient thing in the air around me. And then as a late teenager, when I came to live actually in Europe, the UK actually, and began to, for the first time, encounter the way that Islam and Muslims were discussed and portrayed in media and popular discussions, it was just incredibly disorienting to me because it bore no resemblance or had no relationship to Islam and Muslims as I had come to know the religion or the people growing up. And it was actually not until I encountered your work that I felt that I finally found someone whose scholarship, analysis, portrayal of Islam was something that allowed me to deepen my understanding in a scholarly way of a phenomenon that had always been with me and had been deeply personal to me. And further beyond that, what I started to find, certainly as I started to look into graduate study and began to explore the field, is that each time I found a scholar whose work I benefited from and learned from, I quickly found that they tended to have some relationship to you, that they were in your network, as it were, that there was this madhab Esposito that you know, in many ways, all of us are part of. I think it's fair to say, and it became my aspiration to maybe someday be part of that. But I think, John, it also speaks to the fact that, and I think this is very fair and accurate to say that you are in many ways the chief architect of the infrastructure of post-Orientalist Islamic studies. And I mean, not just your specific scholarly contributions, but everything that you've done to shape and create resources for the field as a whole, the reference works, the journals. You've not just added distinctive intellectual contributions and scholarly perspectives, but you've helped to institutionalize them, to kind of make available as resources to not just scholars, but broader publics as well, a way of understanding and thinking about Islam and Muslims that has just been so powerful. I want to just touch on the three ways in which I, over the years, have seen very clearly your influence and impact in kind of three very different kinds of settings. First of them is connected to a research visit I paid to Indonesia, and I think the late 90s perhaps, when I was visiting a pesantren in Eastern Java. And a group of the more advanced students had a sort of halaqah where they were kind of looking at works of contemporary Islamic thought beyond the conventional curriculum in the school itself. And I was very curious to see what was on their reading list. And their reading list had Nurkholish Majid, Rashid Ghanouchi, Fazlur Rahman, Malik Ben Nabi, and John Esposito. That was the syllabus for this, and you know, there's something very significant in that, I think. Even more so when in sitting with this group, and I kind of remarked on the fact that your work was on the list, and a young woman leaned into me and said, "Have you ever met him?" And when I said I had, my stature in their eyes was just like on my, they get the barakah through me because I had been in the presence. The second of these relates to kind of ethnographic research I was doing among Muslim youth in the UK and Europe, again, in the mid to late 1990s. And, this was a period of time of the UK going through its own throes of what we call Islamophobia today. Just the fact that there was still, even pre 9/11 and before the sort of securitization of Islam that we've seen over the last 20 years, there was this very intense debate and discussion about, the compatibility of Islam with, British values. And the number of times that I heard young people that I spoke to referencing your work, your contributions, just your presence and what you stood for and your stature, and the way that it operated for them as a kind of source of confidence, of security, that there was this towering figure in the field that kind of had their back. It's a very different kind of influence than the obvious important scholarly contributions that we've all referred to. But one, I think, that goes to so many of the things that so many of us have said today, this morning, about your public impact. And the final example that I want to cite kind of doubles down on that public impact, and public now in the sense of the public sector and government. When I had the opportunity to serve in the Obama administration, it became very clear to me that, as I encountered in, for example, the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, other regional bureaus of the State Department, and offices that dealt with countries with Muslim majority populations, the number of American diplomats, civil servants who were familiar with your work, and whose broad compass points for making sense of the Muslim world were broadly derived from the kinds of insights and the paradigm that your work has offered to us, was, to me, just incredibly heartening. And the flip side of that, gets to, as some of my colleagues have mentioned this morning, this very important, principled perspective that you've offered, the stands that you've taken on controversial issues, and the way that you've directly confronted certain kinds of ingrained conventional political wisdom in the United States around these issues in ways that are not just, as many of us have said, principled, but also effective. And to the people who hold them, who push those views, dangerous, right? We can point today at obviously this vast, well-funded, anti-Muslim Islamophobic industry in the United States that, projects that you're central in, like the Bridge Initiative, are so important for addressing. But I think it's fair to say that the earliest precursors of that mode of activism come out of people who were very much responding to your work and what they perceived as the danger of certain kinds of truths that you were bringing into institutionalized spaces. And so for that reason, in addition to everything that you've done to shape this field that we all work in, I want to express deep abiding gratitude to thank you for everything that you've done, and for the opportunity to be with all of you this morning. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum from Kuala Lumpur. I'm very delighted to be here this evening with you, because on one side I have my teacher Tamara Sonn, and on the other side I have John Esposito, a friend and a person who has cared for my career for over so many decades. As people have referred to him as Elvis Presley, and as also the Mike Jagger. But here in Southeast Asia, he's known as the Don of Temple Mafia. And
Yeah,
that fits
that's
him rightly, because as being an Italian, he should be the Don of Mafia, of Temple Mafia, and because of his important role he plays in the Southeast Asian politics. Let me go back to my memory when I had finished my master's degree at Aligarh Muslim University in 1980s. Suddenly, and I moved to Thailand at Mahidol University. And suddenly I saw these books coming in, Voices of Research in Islam and the name of John Esposito emerging in 1980s. So it was a new name, as I said in my essay. And I immediately asked our librarian to order those books, which John was producing nearly every year. And then I came to the thing which I share with John is that we both come from Temple University and we share the same teacher, Ismail Al-Faruqi. And that makes it very, very personal for me because people know of my contribution to workers of Faruqi. I met him first time at the memorial for Professor Faruqi at Temple University, and somehow or the other, we built up a natural fellowship, which continues until today. He has always cared for me, and I will come to that in a minute. And he has also taken me on board on several of his publications, whether the encyclopedia, the dictionary, and many other books. And I have also I had the honor that he invited me to be the first non-Malaysian, non-Malay visiting fellow for the study of chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at Georgetown University. And he, at that time, I learned something from him, and I'm going to share with you, is that he helped me fulfill my dream, and I think it's also his dream, to come up with a Festschrift for Professor Ismail Al-Faruqi in honoring, and he was the person behind me, and I would have not been able to accomplish without his support. And when I was in Georgetown in 2010 and 11, people used to ask me secretly, "You are close to John. Is he a Muslim? Or is he a secret Muslim? Or what type of person is he?" And I asked John, I said, let me ask John directly this question. So one day in his office, I asked him, "John, people are asking all these questions, but I have no answer to give." And he said to me, "Tell them that I serve Islam much better by being not a Muslim than being a Muslim." And I think that was a great answer. And I have been telling that to everyone around. And I am honored to be in this volume. I'm the only one of the 100 students of Temple of Faruqi who has contributed to this volume. And I really feel this honor that I can do it for John, and that I was selected to contribute to this volume. Another something very surprising thing is in my 62 years as a Muslim from childhood until now. Once I was attending a Friday prayer in a mosque in Washington, D.C., and the Imam in the Jummah khutbah said, "Everyone should read John Esposito's What Everyone Needs to Know About Islam." Now, I've never heard a Muslim cleric or a Muslim khatib ever mentioning a Christian scholar to be read to learn about Islam. So that was very heartening, and I was really taken aback. And that was another thing. And another thing which I learned from him, he has been always frank. I remember when in 1997 conference in Malaysia, when the Center for Civilizational Dialogue was set up, and I was giving a lecture. I gave my paper, and I came down, and John came running to me and said immediately, "Next time, talk slowly." And I have kept that advice in my mind every time I give any presentation. Apart from that, being a the Don of Temple Mafia, another thing which I've learned from him, that he always honors his teacher. And this I've learned from him, and I imitate him always, that whenever he gets any award or is acknowledged, he always says, "This goes to Professor Ismail Al-Faruqi," and I have been doing that. And he has been following, as I said, my career. And then a few years before I moved here to Malaysia, about 2 years ago, I was teaching at the College of Religious Studies in Mahidol University in Thailand, which was dominated by Buddhist scholars. The Thai Buddhists had no problem with me, but the European and American Buddhist scholars, American scholars of Buddhism were hounding me like dogs, and because they did not want to see a presence of a Muslim among them, talking about Islam and Buddhism. And I always conveyed that to John, my frustration. And I think he pulled some strings, and that's why I'm here now at ISTAG. And I'm sure he has played a role behind that. So I learned a lot from him. So that's why I dedicated my essay on Islam and Buddhism, because he helped me, he rescued me from those European scholars of Buddhism. And also he helped me in my career always, and has also been concerned about my career development until now. So I really am very grateful and thankful to John for the role he has played in developing my career, and also teaching me things to speak slowly, and also to honor our teacher, the late Professor Ismail Al-Faruqi. And I will also, I'll again end up by saying that I'm very honored that I was the only among the hundreds of Temple University students of Faruqi whom Professor Tamara Sonn and John selected me to contribute to this volume. Thank you very much.
Dr. Esposito, oh gosh, I don't even know where to start. So I'm going to call you John because, to be honest, I see you as a father figure. And so if I call you Dr. Esposito, it just creates this distance that I don't think reflects kind of how I think of you. So, and I otherwise maybe I would call you like Baba John, but I'll just say John. Oh my. So I was thinking, when was the first time that I met you? And I think it was around 2006, 2007 when I was in DC, and I got to meet John, the praxis / advocate, before I really got to know John as a scholarship, your books, because we were in the trenches at the time, at the peak of post 9/11 discrimination in Washington, DC. And I remember when I first learned of you in your center, my cynical side was like, oh yeah, this is just another center that props up moderate, good Muslims and, Muslim Christian understanding. This is probably a center that doesn't want to deal with the reality that many Christians are Islamophobic, and it's affiliated with Saudi Arabia something. And I was a skeptic. And because I hadn't met you yet and I didn't know anything. And then I thought, well, it's Georgetown and it's elite, and I had my own preconceived notions about these elite institutions. And so I remember, I think I went to one of your events, and one of the things that you've done so remarkably well, and I've certainly been a beneficiary, is how you bring people together. These convenings that you had in Georgetown. And I was lucky because I lived in DC, and I would frequently attend and kind of look around who was there. And I said, oh, he's not inviting the good Muslims. He's inviting the radical Muslims, which I think are the good Muslims. And so I thought, okay, there's something different about this center, what's going on here? And it didn't take me long, based on what was being said and who was being invited, to realize that you were not what I expected. And as somebody, and many of us on this call, I think, are the type that we re-examine people's actions, right? Not just their words. It was clear that your actions were committed to civil rights and justice for a group of people that we were so demonized. I mean, we're still demonized, but we're so much better off now than we were back then. And this was a time when nobody wanted to touch us. We were radioactive. And yet you leveraged your status and your prestige as a distinguished professor at Georgetown. You would invite us. I remember people were talking about the oppression against Sami al-Aryan and the Holy Land Foundation, and you spoke at ISNA, and you spoke at the Muslim Legal Fund, and you spoke at CARE when CARE was being under attack and under siege by the FBI and the media. And I thought, wow, this guy's courageous. There's something different about him. And then I don't know if you remember, because I was probably one of many of your fans, but I was quite persistent in trying to get a meeting with you, because at that point I said, I want to get to know him. And I remember coming in to your office before Bridge, I think, and the Bridge Initiative, and started to ask you for advice, and really kind of realized that you were somebody that was a trustworthy ally of a community that otherwise had very few allies, especially in places that had power and influence. And so that was my first impression, or I guess my accurate first impression And since then, I've been so lucky to have you as a mentor. I mean, I've assigned you as my mentor. I don't know if you necessarily agreed to do it, but I was quite persistent. And I think you may recall the advice you gave me when I was working for DHS, which were some really difficult years of talk about, propping up Muslims as good Muslims and attempting to co-opt us. And I just think that one of the things that you do so well is you kept my generation, because at the time I was in my mid-30s, and we were that young generation trying to fight back, but you really helped us get together. You gave us wisdom. You were very steady. And while the rest of us were very upset and emotional, I was always impressed at how calm you could be about things that made one so angry. But you just kept going. And the center was just a phenomenal resource for people. And you would bring, government agents would come because it was Georgetown, and you gave us the stage. You gave us a place for our voices to be heard and to be stated. You were clearly sensitive to gender diversity because we were dealing with things even within our community. And that was something that I appreciated quite a bit about you. And one of, I guess the other thing that I really enjoyed was, well, let me say, at some point, I thought to myself, I really wish I knew you 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, because I thought there's no way that he could have gotten to where he is now without so many battles. Once I got to know you, I said, how did he do it? How did they not purge him? How did they not expel him? Because you're not the type of person the people in power want. And I have to admit, I was like some of the others where I was like, is he Muslim? Which then would make me think, oh, wow. But I can't imagine, I can't wait to read your memoir, because I just cannot imagine now being an academic and now having fought my own battles, how you were able to maneuver. One, I know you fought a lot of battles, because there's no way you can do what you do without fighting battles. I always think of you in terms of your suave, diplomatic, calm demeanor. And I always think, okay, try to be like John. Just try to be like that. He's got it right. Don't get all upset and emotional about these things, because you certainly set a standard. And then I started to read much more of your academic work once I became an academic myself, and realized, wow, he's so humble. And because when you're an advocate and you're not in the academic world, and John, as all of us know, is a very humble, down-to-earth, accessible person. And that's not common. That's not normal, right? In your field. That's one of the reasons why many reasons why you're exceptional. And then you're like, how many books has he? Oh my goodness. He's published a lot of books. I've got to read all this. And I started to appreciate you even more. And I certainly try to model that, because in academia there's way too many egos and too much arrogance, and that tends to impede impact. And I think it's part of the impact that you've made globally. And as everyone has said, you're very well respected and highly regarded by people who themselves have fought the system. And I think that's a tribute to your own true commitment to social justice and true commitment to defending those who are oppressed and those who are vilified. And that takes a lot of courage. And so I just want to say, as somebody who was an advocate for this particular community that is very indebted to you, that we really appreciate it. And we understand that you have to pay a price for that. And you do it out of your own moral commitment, not because of some self-interested reason. And that helps to set an example for the rest of us. And finally, I just want to say that there was a moment, when, as you'll recall, you co-authored a book with Dalia Mugahed, who is one of my peers, right? We're the same age and we were kind of up and coming together. And I remember when you published the book, first I was like, wow, for somebody to publish this book, this is fantastic. And then I remember thinking, I'm so jealous in a good way. But I was like, I can't believe, oh my God, Dalia co-authored with John Esposito. That's like the ultimate success. And I remember thinking, one day I'm going to do that. One day. And so when I got when I was asked to contribute, I was like, of course. And so I'm honored to have contributed to this book. And I also am extremely honored for you, those of you who don't know, that John agreed to write the foreword to my first book. So I've got a lot of catching up to do with you, John, but you're my pace setter, and I will, we're going to follow your example. But as soon as I got the publication, I was like, oh my gosh, it would be such an honor to have his name, on the book as the person who wrote the foreword. And so I thank you so much for doing that. It's just one of the many ways in which you've helped me and helped, many others. And finally, when I did the research on the level of discrimination against Italian Americans, which I admittedly did not know, because you don't teach you that in American schools. And as part of my book project, I thought of you, and I thought, oh my gosh. So not only did he deal with his own discrimination against Italian Americans, because I could do the math and think of your generation and the timing, but instead of responding to that discrimination by passing or hiding or trying to avoid it, you then came and protected Muslim Americans. And that really, to me, just made me respect you even more, because not everybody responds right to racism with that level of courage and that willingness to pay it, the possibility of paying a high price. And so I just want you to know that we do appreciate that. We recognize it. We're very grateful for it. And no matter what all those haters do, no matter how much they attack you, you do have an army, figuratively, of people who will defend you to the end. So thank you.
Ismail was just an incredible teacher for taking me inside. And the fact that he could bring in so many Muslim students, so that my unique experiences compared to, I think, any of the American students of that generation, was that I was in a religion department, and most people who did PhDs in those days in Islamic Studies did it in a history department. But overwhelming number of Muslims, young Muslims coming from across the Muslim world, but still coming out of a new program, and so, you'd hear about somebody that you knew who didn't get tenure at the University of Virginia, but because he was the student of Fazlur Rahman, got a job in such and such a university, could get it that easily, and it was a little different with Ismail. I mean, Ismail was a Palestinian, and he was a Palestinian American, but he was a Palestinian. He was a Palestinian's Palestinian. And he was really bright, but he also, in being bright, could sometimes be a lightning rod. So it was a way of getting through. But for some reason, I decided to study Islam. I still don't know. In the memoir, I deal with that, because I had encouraged my younger brother not to stay in philosophy at a time when there were no jobs in philosophy. And I remember when I made the switch, my friend said to me, we're all Catholic theologians and we're all studying together. Why would you do this? Why would you study this abracadabra stuff? There'll always be Catholic universities. You'll have a job. You're not going to have one. And sure enough, the first job that I had at Rosemont College, where I was voted tenure a year before I should get it, the president asked me to wait a year so that it wouldn't throw the whole thing out. Well, all of a sudden, we're in the Middle East, and I'm told that what a terrific person I was, but gee, I've now moved into Islam, and they thought they needed a priest who taught theology. So, so talk about a market, there's no market, and when I got the job at Holy Cross, it was to teach everything but Islam. It was mainly because I could teach 4 religions. I was trained in the world religions. So, the real time when and to publish was very difficult. The stuff on women in Muslim family law, I was very lucky that I met a very prominent Malay scholar who, I think it's the library now at the university there is named after him, of the law school, who published one of my pieces, and then somebody else published a piece, but I didn't get a chance to really have any interaction seriously with publishers. That is, you'd write to them, you wouldn't get an answer. Or what I got from Oxford, it turned out to be Cynthia Reed, was great idea, but there's no market now. And then Iran came along. And so, I always say I owe my career and my first Lexus to Khomeini, and it's quite literally true. And then the book contracts came in 3 and 5 weeks, and all of that other stuff took off. But I think that without going on about all of this stuff, what I would mention is that for many of you, I already know the kinds of people you are, and others I know you as a scholar, but not the dimensions. I think the challenge we have as scholars, at least I think for some of us, is even in our scholarship, thinking about doing that which we love, but also to maximize people's awareness of it in some way or other, so that we're not just, if you just write for yourself and a very small group of people, that can be nice, but a number of people that I know who've done that wind up being pretty, after a while, a little down. They like doing it, but then they resent the fact that they don't get the attention that others do, that their books aren't, written as much as other people, or you get the put down I got when I was a postdoc at Harvard. I'm online, and the director of that center, whose name I won't mention, and who I don't think he had published a book, and he was out for 25 years. He finally published it because he was the director of the center. His dissertation got published. But he said to me in front of everybody on a food line, "Gee, John, it's terrific. You've been so productive. It's just amazing. What do we have? You have 3 weeks, three books come out recently. It's really great the way you can write for the general public." It was just a wonderful, and at first that stung, but then the longer I was in the field, the more I realized, hey, if you write for a broader audience, you get a lot more books out there, and you impact a lot of other people, because the government people have to read stuff that's written that's very accessible, and a variety of people, let alone when you're teaching and everything else. And I found that's what really drove me. I never saw myself as doing a book. I always thought I'd do a couple of articles and get tenure. I never had a vision of myself as being a leader in the field. I remember when I was nominated to be president of MESA, I was very, relatively speaking, very young. It was 1986 at the time. And I just figured, well, that was a mistake. And then even when things went well, but 8 years ago, and I was nominated to be president of the AAR, I was delighted. And I said to Gene, I'll never win, because, I go to AAR a lot, but I'm not really totally an AAR person. And my history goes back to the fact that many of you would know it. The American Academy of Religion did not have Islam present in the American Academy of Religion. It got in there because of Faruqi and some of his grad students, myself and others. And we had to make an argument for, and then be tested for X number of years before Islam became a permanent unit within the AAR. So there was a lot of those things that were going on at the time. But I think the extent to which we also respond to what we see in the world makes a big difference. It's not easy. And again, particularly to Tamara, how you did it, and that you did it as a surprise, except that 2 or 3 people presumed I knew. And so we'd have a conversation about something. At the end of it, they'd say, "Oh yeah, I'll see you on," and then they go, you do know about. So, but many ways that was kind of nice. I kind of enjoyed the idea and the pleasure, over a longer period of time. But it's just amazing that this happened. And as I just want to say, I owe it to Faruqi, I owe it to my parents and my brothers, and I owe it to 55 years, I'll be 56 in July.